Support for WUWM podcasts comes from University School of Milwaukee, fulfilling a values-based mission of developing learners, fostering leaders, and preparing citizens for pre-kindergarten through 12th grade. More information at usm.org/mission.
Lake Effect brings you conversations about what's happening in Milwaukee and the people, places, and organizations that shape the community. This is Lake Effect Spotlight from WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.
It's local budget season again, and Milwaukee County and the City of Milwaukee are finalizing their budgets. While the mayor's proposed budget for the city escapes major cuts to services, Milwaukee County's budget includes cuts to MCTS, rising public safety and building maintenance costs, and increased property tax rates. Rob Henken, immediate past president of the Wisconsin Policy Forum, joins Lake Effect Sam Woods to discuss both budgets.
Over the summer, there was a surprise announcement to the county's fiscal picture. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, so first of all, even going back further to the spring, there was a relatively surprising announcement when the comptroller released the 5-year forecast for the county and projected roughly a $47 million deficit for the 2026 budget season. Now, most close observers, including the Wisconsin Policy Forum, were certainly expecting there to be some deficit. There's almost always a deficit when Milwaukee County begins its budget preparation. But those deficits for the past several years have tended to be in the $10 to $15 million range, which were relatively manageable. So a $47 million projection was somewhat surprising. The news got worse then a month or two later when the Milwaukee County Transit System, actually in June, informed the county board that they were projecting a $10.9 million mid-year 2025 deficit. And so that had an impact not only on the 2025 budget, but also on 2026 budget preparations, because the factors that contributed to that mid-year deficit in 25 were certain to linger into 2026 and would have to be addressed. So that was quite a double whammy that set this up as being a very challenging budget season.
So you mentioned the Milwaukee County Transit System, and I'll start there. One of the bigger headlines from this budget are cuts to MCTS services. So what are some of the major proposed cuts to MCTS services, and how will this show up in residents' lives?
So there's no question that this is a substantial amount of service reduction. The estimate is about a 15% reduction in total MCTS service. When you look at it, it's quote unquote only 6 bus routes that are being eliminated, and I don't want to minimize the impact on the users of those routes. But those are 6 relatively low performing routes as defined by passengers per bus hour. There's another 5 routes that would be shortened. And so those have impacts, no question. I think what's more under the radar is that there are also going to be changes on dozens of other routes in terms of reduced frequency of the service. And that really makes a difference. If you have to wait 20 minutes for the next bus as opposed to 12 minutes or 15 minutes, then that can really make a difference in your commuting experience. And for some routes that really are based on providing a relatively rapid level of service, that might also dissuade people from using that bus route, which could then have a negative impact on ridership and passenger revenue. So it's really hard to determine exactly how that's going to play out and how big the impacts are going to be. But again, that reduced service frequency on dozens of routes, the impacts of that should not be minimized.
I want to turn to public safety. The report mentions that the sheriff's office expenditures are up over 15% compared to last year, despite the department only adding a net of 1 full-time employee. So what's contributing to these rising costs in the sheriff's office?
So, Sam, this is the classic example of there's a lot of moving pieces here, and the overall numbers do not paint the total picture. So yes, if you simply compare the amount of money budgeted for the office of the sheriff in 2026 per the recommended budget versus 2025 in the adopted budget, you see a 15.9% increase from 64.7 million to 75.1 million. But now there are the caveats. Number one, about 3.8 million of that amount is simply attributed to a technical accounting change. What we are also seeing is just there's a cost to continue here. So um, the new budget has to take into account salary increases, benefit increases for the office of the sheriff, and so inevitably, even just to maintain the same level of staffing and the same level of service, you would have to see an increase in expenditures. Where there is a real increase is in the sheriff's overtime budget. Now, overtime spending has been a perennial problem, and the county has traditionally not budgeted enough, which has resulted in mid-year deficits. And 2025 is a case in point. In a report by the comptroller in September, there was a projection of an $8.6 million overtime deficit for the sheriff, and that results from just having either too many vacant positions or other factors that just require the use of overtime. And so the good news is that the recommended budget adds about $3.6 million to address that overtime deficit. The bad news is that still falls far short of the $8.6 million projected for this year.
So when we spoke last year about the county budget, you mentioned a backlog of capital improvements that at the time was nearing $1 billion. Can you explain what a capital improvement refers to and what this looming backlog might mean for future budgets?
By far, the largest financial challenge facing Milwaukee County is this capital improvements backlog. So capital improvements refers to needed expenditures on infrastructure repairs and replacement to the county's capital assets. And the county owns billions of dollars worth of capital assets, ranging from the airport to the parks to the fleet of 300 buses to all of the county buildings, etc. And so the problem is that the county has been faced with sort of the dual challenge of both addressing its aging infrastructure and trying to take care of infrastructure needs, with also trying to make sure that they are not issuing too much debt to finance those repairs and replacements and improvements. Because if they issue too much debt, then their annual debt service costs in terms of principal and interest on that debt skyrockets, and that certainly comes into conflict with their operational needs. In our estimation, and we've been warning about this for years, the county has erred too much on the side of controlling its debt and has not taken sufficient care of its capital assets. And this goes back 15 years across several county executives and county boards. And so what happens every year is that departments request capital projects based on what they deem to be necessary repair and replacement and improvement needs. In order to stay within a self-imposed debt limit, the county is only able to finance roughly half of those requests every year. And so a backlog builds because you can choose not to finance the request, but if the building is falling apart or the roadway is falling apart, eventually you're going to have to spend the money to do it. And then just the frosting on the cake here is when a really big new project comes along. And that is certainly the case here with the county, as there is a plan that has been delayed for many, many years to replace the aging and obsolete safety building, make other improvements that are absolutely vital to the courthouse complex. That project, which is being initiated in earnest per the 26 recommended budget with $15 million or so of design money, that will eventually have to be financed at about $450 million.
how long can we realistically put these improvements off?
Well, the day of reckoning has essentially arrived. I think that's part of the problem. And to their credit, I mean, the county, the building across the street from the courthouse that has housed the medical examiner for many, many years was literally falling apart. And the county decided to bite the bullet and is making a very impressive investment on a collaborative project out at the Milwaukee County grounds, a new forensic science center, which will house the medical examiner, the Office of Emergency Management. There's a partnership with the Medical College of Wisconsin. It's a very expensive project, but the county is doing it. The county has essentially now reached that point with the courthouse complex. In many ways, it's unfair to the current administration because, again, this project has been in the planning stage for at least 15 years. But, how to afford it has always been the key question. So that day has arrived. They can't put it off any longer. A huge victory in the recently passed state budget is that the state made a change and is now going to be fully funding the cost of Milwaukee County's state mandated expressway patrol on state highways and interstate highways within Milwaukee County. They've added about $19 million annually to the county's budget for that purpose. And the intent is that the county will then use property tax levy resources and other resources that formerly went into expressway patrol and use those monies to finance either debt payments or actual cost of that courthouse project. That'll help, but it's only still going to take care of, at best, half of the annual debt service cost associated with that project. So they've arrived, and as we also spend a good deal of time talking about in our budget brief, the real consequence there is going to be on the property tax bills of Milwaukee County residents and property owners. Again, there is no choice but to borrow to finance this level of capital improvement. And there is no limit on the amount of property tax levy that the county can issue to pay for its debt service, which makes sense. But we are seeing a 4.1% proposed increase in the levy in the 26 recommended budget. That's not unexpected. It's high. It's actually the highest in at least 20 years. The problem is if this is going to be the norm, if 4 to 5 or even 6% per year property tax levy increases at the county level, on top of what the city is doing and what Milwaukee Public Schools are doing and what the sewerage district is doing, that's going to be a pretty big impact on property taxpayers.
So you preempted my next question almost perfectly. The county executive's proposal includes a 4.1% property tax increase, a couple of years after property taxes were decreased by over 7%. But as your report mentions, and as you just mentioned here, that is the largest increase by percentage in over 20 years. So, Rob, I guess I'll ask you to look into your crystal ball here. Should we expect property tax increases to continue in the future?
I think there's no question that the level of increase is going to be higher for the foreseeable future than it has been over the past 10 or 20 years, where typically annual property tax levy increases have been in the 1 to 2.5% range. And so again, we're not saying this to be critical. You have to take care of your assets, and aging infrastructure is expensive to take care of. The county has been very judicious in its use of the property tax and in raising the property tax annually prior to now. And as you just mentioned, actually, when it received a surge in sales tax revenues, when the state authorized an increase in the county sales tax a couple of years ago, it used that as an opportunity that year in the 24 budget to reduce property taxes. So this is not an act of irresponsibility. It's an act of reality. But given the need to issue more debt to take care of these projects, looking into my crystal ball, I would surmise that 4% is the minimum increase that we're going to be seeing over the next couple of years. And so, where that becomes a particular problem is if we continue to see these other governments in Milwaukee County that levy property taxes, from school districts to municipal governments to, again, the sewerage district and also the technical college district, if they are all higher than usual in their annual property tax levies, then collectively that does raise questions about affordability, about economic competitiveness, et cetera. So one of the things we're suggesting is that we really need to have county leaders, school district leaders, city leaders, sewerage district and technical college district leaders talking about this and comparing notes and seeing what other governments are doing. Because if everybody feels like, sorry, we just have to go a little higher than normal, that is certainly going to add up.
We've talked a lot about cuts in this interview to MCTS and rising expenditures in the sheriff's office, property tax increases. Is there any good news, any positive news embedded in this budget that you see?
So I'm glad you asked that question because, for me, I've been analyzing county budgets since 1998. So I have seen the worst of times at Milwaukee County. This is not the worst of times. The county has certain bright spots that it did not have back in the 2000 to 2010 decade and the 2010 to 2020 decade. That means that this is not an existential crisis. It's a big challenge. So first and foremost, the county has something called a debt service reserve with $140 million in it. Back in the day when I was the director of administration for Milwaukee County in 2007, the county had no reserves whatsoever. So that $140 million, while it shouldn't be spent down, there should always be some level of reserves. There is the ability to strategically use chunks of that in individual budgets to try to hold down property tax levy increases and really to counter the need to levy more to finance debt obligations. So that's one big bright spot, and county leaders deserve credit. They've built that reserve, and there was a lot of temptation to use it up already, and they haven't done so, and so they have it for some tough years ahead. The second really important factor is that the county issued about $400 million in debt for pension obligation bonds back in 2009. And those bonds are almost paid off. And when they are paid off in 2031, that will be a major financial benefit to the county. In fact, debt service on those bonds will drop from the $30 million range to $12 million as soon as 2029, will be totally eliminated in 2031. And the county's revenue picture is brighter than it used to be because it has an increased sales tax, because it has the promise of some growth from year to year in its state shared revenue. So again, the picture is not all bleak. It is extremely challenging. It definitely deserves a lot of attention. But this is not the existential crisis that existed in the wake of the pension scandal back in the early 2000s.
So I want to turn to the City of Milwaukee's budget for a couple questions. We focused a lot on the county here, but this year's city budget does not seem to project the kind of major changes in services or major cuts that we're seeing in proposed in Milwaukee County's budget. But there are some looming fiscal challenges here in this budget. Is that correct?
You are correct that there aren't the types of noticeable service level impacts in the recommended city budget that we see in the county budget in terms of the transit system, and there are also some substantive service level cuts in behavioral health services. One of the reasons for that is that city government has the ability to tap very heavily into its reserves, something called a tax stabilization fund that, due to a variety of factors, has more money in it than it usually does. And the mayor's proposed budget recommends withdrawing about $37 million from that fund. Were it not for the ability to do that, then I think we would have seen the types of service level impacts at the city that we're seeing at the county in the county executive's recommended budget.
So the last question I have for you regards both Milwaukee County and the city, as well as federal funding. So we've seen a number of stories of cuts to federal funding affecting local nonprofits and local recipients of federal grants. But are we seeing federal funding cuts coming home to Milwaukee County and the city's budgets this year?
So it's again, a very tricky question. We have seen a few impacts. Most notably, the city had been counting on a big federal grant to help with reconstruction of 6th Street, and that grant was pulled. So there have been some instances of some federal grants being pulled. There have been already a few changes to the Medicaid program that have sort of indirectly impacted behavioral health services at the county. But for the most part, this is still a question that is yet to be determined. In all likelihood, there will minimally be reduced grant opportunities for the city and county, which could trickle down into budgetary impacts. For the county in particular, there is likely to be an impact on Medicaid reimbursement, and that's a very important funding source for behavioral health services and disability services for Milwaukee County. There may be impacts on federal transit funding. There may be impacts on law enforcement grants and funding that could hit both the city and the county. But really, we don't know precisely what those will be, how big they will be, and when they would take effect. So right now, if you simply look at the mayor's proposed budget for 26 and the county executive's recommended budget for 2026, you do not see those potential impacts really present in those budgets. And so I think the scary thing is, what if it does turn out to be as bad as some expect, and there are some direct impacts to funding streams that have been budgeted in the 2026 budgets, that could have an impact. But also, the federal fiscal year is different. It's October 1st. And so really, the timing, it's just too early to determine the timing.
Gotcha. Well, Rob Henken, thank you so much for joining me on Lake Effect and for making our local government budget picture just a little bit clearer.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Rob Henken is the immediate past president at the Wisconsin Policy Forum. He spoke with Lake Effect's Sam Woods. You can find an extended conversation on MCTS cuts at wuwm.com.
You can find more interviews like this one by visiting wuwm.com/Lake Effect. And while you're there, subscribe to the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast.